You would think that with a long dirty hair that you would not have been allowed to go anywhere near anything that people would eat. But that was where she worked. She worked in the bakery. Her long thin arms would pull at the bread and the dough and mould it into the shapes of bread. But her hair was long and black and thick and dirty, because what she loved to do in her spare time was go down by the side of the River Thames, and when the waters had receded she would be there like a mudlark, pushing and pulling her way, slurping through all of the thick greasy mud to see what she could find. Now, she was an unkind girl. There was no doubt about that, because that was just the way that she was. In her spare time, she would say, "In my spare time, I work in the bakery." She was not far from the middle of town, and I've got to tell you that as soon as she would finish her work, she would go out and she would pull her fingers through all of the mud to see what she could find. Things that had been cast off from the boats, things that had fallen from the sides of the quayside. And that was why she never wore anything on her legs. She had a dress that had once been long and had belonged to somebody else, but now it was ragged and short. She thought it was a good thing to have thin arms, because then she could pull through the mud the quicker and the faster and find all of the things that she wanted. She would look around, she would sneer at anybody that came close to her, because she decided that she was going to take everything that she could and keep it for herself, because that's the way that she was. And it wasn't just restricted to being down by the side of the River Thames, because she would take things when she thought no one was looking. She would take things from out of the bakery. Well, mostly they used the oven. They would use long spatulas of wood to push the bread further into the oven and pull them out. And she had scalds and burns on her arms, but all she was thinking about was taking the rusty pan. The rusty pan that she could see that no one had used, so it wasn't really taking it. It was a case of helping them by making some space inside of the bakery. Well, as she looked out through a cracked wooden window at the side of the bakery, she could see that there was a light in the air. Now, she knew that she had worked a long time, but she hadn't walked all of the way through to dawn, because she'd walked that way many times, and now she had worked and there was a bright glow in the air, and she decided that she would go out and see what she could see, even though she hadn't finished all of her work. When she went outside, she could smell smoke. It was not thick and heavy in the air, but there amongst all of the other bakers, above the smell of the yeast and the bread, there was the smell of broken and burnt wood. And she could see that there was a man, an old man that she'd always been frightened of, but there, through that broken window, as she walked past it, she could see him gathering up all of his papers, all of his boxes, and he was taking them and putting them onto a cart outside. But when he put them outside onto the cart, a wooden box with huge iron hinges fell down on the ground and spilt everything out of it. Now, on the top of all of these things, she could see his mark, to make sure that he knew that the things were his. And she reached down, and she didn't mean anything more than to pick it up and put it back inside of the box. But as she reached down, she picked up what looked like a pencil. It was longer than any pencil she'd ever seen, and she waved it above her head. "Oh, let's just see what this can do." Well, she'd always been unkind, and that man was an alchemist, an apothecary, a dabbler in magic. And that was no pencil that she had picked up, but it was a wand that had broken. And she had only thought of bad things that she could turn to, but with waving it above her head, and broken as it was, it changed the way that she was. The man had fearful looking eyes. He was coming closer to her. "What do you think you're doing, you stupid girl? Give me that!" And here he snatched his wand from out of her hand. And she laughed to herself, because as he grabbed hold of it and picked it up, it snapped and broke into two pieces upon the ground. Now he was pushing all of his goods into the cart, but he was old and thin, and he had never had to do anything in a hurry in his life, or had to do anything that required him to do work. And he was pushing at that barrow as hard as he could towards the wooden bridge. But when there is a fire, the last place that you should head for is something that is made out of wood. The girl could see. She could see that he was heading towards a broken bridge that had been scorched by the fire's flames and would not bear his or all of his things' weight. She would never have helped him in the past, but with waving the stick above her head, it had changed the way that she was. And she ran. She ran where she could see the horse's hoof prints in the mud. She ran towards that man, and he was struggling to pull all of his goods from off the side of the broken bridge. But she didn't wait. She picked him up. She knew that it was better to save his life than to save all of his things, all of his inks, his pens, his paintbrushes. And I've got to tell you, she looked. There was something about the paintbrushes, for they had his mark on them. And she had found those things in the mud by the side of the Thames. He wasn't grateful. She'd put him upon her back. She'd dragged him out of the mud. She'd saved his life, and never a word of thank you passed his lips. But she wondered. She wondered that if a stick could hold magic, then the other things that she'd found in the mud of the Thames might also hold magic inside of them. Some people were surprised. Some people were shocked by the way that she had changed, for she helped everyone that she could as the fire started to consume the heart and soul of London town. They knew her. They thought that she would be only trying to do bad things. But she smiled to herself. And it was the way that she was for the rest of her life. For out of all of the ashes of the fire of London, she had emerged like a phoenix, as someone who was kind, someone who was good, someone who could make bread, and someone who had magic at her fingertips.